Imagine you are walking along looking down at your phone. You're in the middle of scrolling through your feed when the screen goes black. The cars around you come to a halt, and the lights in the stores begin to flicker out. You are now faced with living off the grid because the grid has just disappeared. To many, living off the grid may seem a little bit like the picture on the left, but to others, it's a little bit more something that's on the right, de-stressing and more connected to nature. In 2010, Nick Rosen stated in an interview that there are 1 to 2 million Americans living off the grid. Now, there are 7 million, still only 2% of the American population. My story, I was living off the grid for 1 week. This took place in the Boundary Waters. When I was living off the grid, I had to adapt. The many adaptations that I had to face was food and shelter. These adaptations are important to consider when learning how to live off the grid. When I was preparing to live off the grid, the first thing I realized was I had to find food a different way. Food is very important to us. And living off the grid, you have to find it in many different ways. The first way, and the most common way, is to grow it yourself. Growing gardens is something that most of us know a little bit about. But if you're relying on this source, you need to know more. In Alan Moore's review of Fresh from the Garden, he highlights the basics of gardening, such as site selection, planting seeds, and anticipating weather changes. If you do not take into consideration these factors, you may be left with no food. A second way to get food is to raise livestock. The most common livestock to raise are chickens, goats, and cows. This provides us with the protein and the dairy that we need. Both growing gardens and raising livestock do require a lot of effort. So one way to get food that requires less effort is to use the resources that are given to you. In the Boundary Waters, these resources included wild berries and fish. When I was in the Boundary Waters, I spent most of my days on the lake in the canoe trying to catch fish for my dinner. Some days I was not so lucky because nature is sometimes unpredictable, and I went with a little bit less for dinner. On the days that I did catch fish, I had to prepare it. Preparing is a whole other time commitment. You have to go out and find wood and start a fire, because stoves, ovens, and microwaves are not a thing that you have while you're living off the grid. One night, I was not very good with my time commitment, with my time management, and I was starting my fire just as the sun went down. That was not so much fun. And also, you know, food is a basic necessity. But the second basic necessity that you need to adapt to is finding shelter. When finding shelter off the grid, there are two things you must consider. First is locating a site, and the second is to find sustainable materials. When locating a site, you must look at all the things around to make sure that it is suitable for your needs. In Eric Eltram's article, he discussed that the importance of inspecting the site and assessing the potential of the land. In the Boundary Waters, the first night, I was not so lucky, and I got stuck with a site that was slanting down to the water and full of rocks. All night, I was waking up, sliding back up my tent, and pulling rocks out of my back. Along with the location of the site, you must also find materials that are suitable to your needs. These materials must protect against the outside elements, such as rain and sometimes even animals. For me, these materials included having a tarp underneath my tent and a rain cover on the top. These made sure that the rain did not get into my tent, And as for the animals, I made sure that the tent door was closed at all times, and I had a can of bear spray close by. The materials must protect against these elements, but they also need to take advantage of the natural resources and generate power from them. David Black pointed out in his 2008 book, Living Off the Grid, A Simple Guide to Creating and Maintaining Self-Reliant Supplies, that living off the grid builds self-sufficiency with the minimal reliance on public utilities. For me, I did not have to rely on any public utilities because the sun generated heat into my tent for all night long. Living off the grid can sometimes seem very challenging, but the outcome that you get outweighs the hardships that you have to face. Now, I challenge you to use these steps to try and live a week off the grid, and who knows, maybe someday the grid may disappear and you will have to, but you will be prepared